In this portion of the training, I'm going to discuss the timelines for responding to challenges, as well as issues that can come up as you navigate the process. This video discusses the process whereby mobile challengers respond to a challenge in the BDC system. More information on the mobile challenge process can be found online at the BDC Help Center at help.bdc.fcc.gov. As part of the Broadband Data Collection, or BDC, challenged mobile providers may receive challenges to the coverage areas they submitted into the BDC system. Speed tests will be conducted and transmitted to the FCC by consumers using the FCC Speed Test app and government and other entities using either the FCC Speed Test app or their own hardware and software. Valid speed tests from both consumers and entities will then be aggregated and analyzed at the end of each month. Challenges are created by associating the location of validated speed tests within geographic hexagons defined by the H3 geospatial indexing system. The smallest challenge will be to a resolution 8 hexagon, which is approximately the size of 1 square kilometer. Once there are enough failed tests, or tests showing speeds below 5.1 megabits per second for 4G, or 7.1 or 35.3 megabits per second for 5G within a resolution 8 hexagon to meet specified geographic, temporal, and numerical testing thresholds, a cognizable challenge will be created. Providers must respond to all cognizable challenges. Mobile broadband service providers will be notified monthly via email of all cognizable challenges to their coverage maps. A provider must respond to a cognizable challenge no later than 60 days after the email notification is sent. A mobile provider may either concede the challenge, which requires it to move the conceded area from its coverage maps, or attempt to rebut the challenge by submitting either on-the-ground speed test data or infrastructure data. Failure to respond within 60 days will result in a finding against a provider, after which it must correct its BDC information within 30 days to conform to the conceded challenge. Commission staff may also request more data if needed to ensure adequate review. Once a provider responds to the challenge, the individuals or entities whose speed tests support the challenge will be notified of its response. After our review of a provider's response, we will notify it by email about whether or not the challenge has been successfully rebutted, if the challenge was not successfully rebutted and therefore will be upheld, or if the challenged area was restored based on insufficient evidence to sustain the challenge. If a provider concedes or loses a challenge, it must file within 30 days geospatial data depicting the challenged area that has been shown to lack service no longer being in its coverage map. Such data will constitute a correction layer to a provider's original propagation model-based coverage map, and commission staff will use this layer to update the broadband coverage map. Failure to file this data could result in enforcement action. A provider responding to a challenge with on-the-ground test data must submit data for each challenged hexagon that meets the following testing parameters: a minimum test length of 5 seconds and a maximum test length of 30 seconds. These test length parameters apply individually to download speed, upload speed, and round-trip latency measurements, and do not include ramp-up time. The minimum test duration requirement will be relaxed once a download or upload test measurement has transferred at least 1,000 megabits of data. Reporting test measurement results that have been averaged over the duration of the test, or total bits received divided by total test time, and conducted outdoors between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. local time. Additionally, providers have the burden to demonstrate that sufficient coverage exists at least 90% of the time. To rebut the challenge using on-the-ground speed test data, providers must submit the data elements referenced in the mobile speed test data specifications for submission into the BDC system. These specifications are available on the FCC's Broadband Data Collection website at fcc.gov/broadbanddata/resources under the Key Reference Document tab. The data must be submitted in the BDC system via file upload or an API. Speed test data must be in JavaScript object notation, JSON format, and match the specifications previously listed. Providers on-the-ground tests for each challenged hexagon will need to meet thresholds analogous to those required to create a challenge, albeit with positive tests rather than negative ones, and adjusted values, or the number of tests in percentages, for test data in each threshold. Geographic threshold. Past tests must be geographically distributed across the challenged hexagon. For the geographic threshold, at least 4-point hexes of a resolution 8 hexagon must include 2 download test components taken within them, at least one of which must be positive, and at least 4-point hexes of a resolution 8 hexagon must include 2 upload test components taken within them, at least one of which must be positive to demonstrate that adequate coverage occurs at multiple locations within the resolution 8 hexagon. Temporal threshold. The tests must be taken at different parts of a day. To meet the temporal threshold, each resolution 8 hexagon will need to include a set of 5 positive download components with a time of day difference of at least 4 hours from another set of 5 positive download components, regardless of the date of the test, and a set of 5 positive upload components with a time of day difference of at least 4 hours from another set of 5 positive upload components, regardless of the date of the test. Testing threshold. There must be a sufficient number of tests in the hexagon. Challenged providers must demonstrate statistically significant evidence that coverage is adequate to overturn a challenge using on-the-ground speed tests based on the same statistical significance analysis used for determining challenges for both upload and download components. Specifically, in order for the testing threshold for a resolution 8 hexagon to be met, we require that at least 17 positive test components of the same type have been taken in the hexagon when the provider has submitted 20 or fewer test components of that type. When the provider has submitted more than 20 test components of the same type, we require that a certain minimum percentage of the total number of test components of that type in the hexagon must be positive, ranging from at least 82% positive when providers have submitted between 21 and 34 total test components of the same type, to at least 88% positive when providers have submitted 100 or more test components of the same type. Additionally, if more than 50% of the test components of the same type are within a single point hex where 4 or more point hexes in the resolution 8 hexagon are accessible, the test components in that point hex will be downweighted to only account for 50% of the total test components when evaluating the testing threshold. Providers may use the FCC Speed Test app, another app approved by the FCC's Office of Engineering and Technology for use in the challenge process that is identified on the FCC's website, or their own hardware and software. To the extent that a provider chooses to use its own software other than the FCC Speed Test app or another speed test app approved by the OET for use in the challenge process, the software must incorporate the test methodology and collect the metrics that approved apps must gather for consumer challenges and that government and third-party entity challenger speed test data must contain. Providers must collect all of the required technical information and RF metrics using a device that is able to interface with drive test software and/or runs on the Android operating system. Providers conducting in-vehicle mobile tests or drive tests must conduct such tests with the antenna located inside the vehicle. A provider may submit infrastructure data on their own to rebut a challenge only in the instances enumerated under Section 1.7006E4V of the Commission's rules. A provider may submit only infrastructure data to rebut a challenge if extenuating circumstances at the time and location of a given test, for example, maintenance or temporary outage at a cell site, cause service to be abnormal. In such cases, a provider must submit coverage or footprint data for the site or sectors that were affected and information about the outage, such as bands affected, duration, and whether the outage was reported to the FCC's Network Outage Reporting System, NORS, along with a certification about the submission's accuracy. The mobile device or devices with which the challenge or challengers conducted their speed test are not capable of using or connecting to the radio technology or spectrum band or bands that the provider models for service in the challenged area. In such cases, a provider must submit band-specific coverage footprints and information about which specific device or devices lack the technology or band. The challenge speed tests were taken during an uncommon special event, for example, professional sporting event that increased traffic on the network. The challenge speed tests were taken during a period where cell loading was abnormally higher than the modeled cell loading factor. In such cases, providers must submit cell loading data that both establishes that the cell loading for the primary cell or cells at the time of the test was abnormally higher than modeled, and include cell loading data for a 1-week period before and/or after the provider was notified of the challenge, showing as a baseline that the median loading for the primary cell or cells was not greater than the modeled value. The mobile device or devices with which the challenger or challengers conducted their speed test used a data plan that could result in slower service. In such cases, a provider must submit information about which specific device or devices used in the testing were using such a data plan and information showing that the provider's network did, in fact, slow the device at the time of the test. Or the mobile device or devices with which the challenger or challengers conducted their speed tests was either roaming or was used by the customer of a mobile virtual network operator. In such circumstances, providers must identify which specific device or devices used in the testing were either roaming at the time or used by a customer of a mobile virtual network operator based on their records. To rebut the challenge using infrastructure data, providers must submit the data elements referenced in the infrastructure data specifications for submission into the BDC system. These specifications are available on the FCC's Broadband Data Collection website at fcc.gov/broadbanddata/resources under the Key Reference Document tab. A provider may optionally include additional data or information in support of a response, including drive testing data collected in the ordinary course of business, third-party testing data, such as speed test data from Ookla or other speed test app, and/or tower transmitter data collected from transmitter monitoring software. The Office of Economics and Analytics staff will review any voluntarily submitted data in response to challenges, and if they find any of the data sources to be sufficiently reliable, the Office of Economics and Analytics will specify appropriate standards and specifications for each type of data and issue a public notice adding the data source to the alternatives available to providers to rebut a consumer challenge. Before a provider receives access to crowdsourced or challenged data, it will be required within the BDC system to acknowledge that it will use any personally identifiable information that it receives for the sole purpose of responding to the challenge, and that it will protect and keep private all such personally identifiable information. Any challenged areas where a provider has demonstrated sufficient coverage is ineligible for subsequent challenge for a period of time. A challenge to that area can only be created against the data that are filed during the next BDC filing period that occurs at least 6 months after the original challenge is resolved, or the 60-day response period for the original challenge ends. This ineligibility applies only with respect to the particular network technology and modeled environment for which the provider has demonstrated sufficient coverage. To conclude, we sincerely appreciate providers' efforts to address challenges in a constructive fashion in the challenge process. Your participation is a vital aspect to the overall effectiveness and success of the broadband data collection, and we stand ready to assist you as you work through this process. If you have further questions, please contact the BDC Help Center at help.bdc.fcc.gov.